Mm, 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 mm. Hey y'all, there's a lot going on, and there is a high-profile surrogacy case that is garnering a lot of attention, a lot of opinions, and you guys are disagreeing with each other in the comments. I've been reading the comments, and what it has shown me is that a lot of people really don't understand how surrogacy even works. And I think if we understood how surrogacy actually worked, it would sort of ease some of the tension that's happening when people are sharing their opinion about what they think should happen in this particular case. Now, granted, my goal today is not to sway your decision as to whether or not you side with the surrogate or you side with the intended parents. My goal today is to make sure we are all starting from a foundation where we understand the facts. Because if you don't understand the facts about surrogacy, you're going to be huffing and puffing for no reason. Like, I'm gonna need you to install later. That's my computer just deciding to do what it wants to do in the midst of our discussion today. That will not happen. So anyway, I really wanted to sort of dispel some of the myths and give some of the facts about the case because I understand y'all are out there in your feelings about this case, and I get it. It's one of those issues that make people very emotional and have very passionate opinions about it. I totally get it. It's okay to have a passionate opinion, but I want us to also know the facts first because there's a lot of rumors going around and mis and disinformation again, because we're in that informatic age where people are just all over the place when it comes to information, especially when it comes to health information. Need I say more? That being said, so let's get into some of the basic facts about this case. Should I? Let's do it. So one of the things you should know is that the intended parents, which is Nasheen Gilkar, I hope I'm not mispronouncing people's name, but I'm gonna try. So Nasheen Gilkar and Omar Ahmed were the intended parents, and the surrogate was McKenna West. Now, the three of them made a surrogacy agreement. Now, it's important to make, I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV. But I do know certain things that I need to really make sure that is cleared. There is a difference between an agreement and a contract. Y'all, I'm so shiny. You could probably see yourselves in my face. Oh, excuse your girls today. Um, so surrogacy legal documents are agreements. They're not contracts. And that's important in terms of how they are enforced and how they are interpreted. What's important to know is that McKenna West was a gestational carrier. She was not a traditional surrogate. So traditional surrogacies are sort of getting a little bit more phased out. They're not as common. More commonly, you will find gestational surrogates, and those are the individuals who do not have a genetic connection to the baby, which means that the baby's genetics either came from the intended parents or from a donor. Nonetheless, that surrogate has no ownership of the child, but that surrogate does still have ownership of her body. Keep that in mind. We'll get into that part in a little bit because that's where a lot of the controversy is coming up. So they made agreement, and typically, as a part of surrogacy agreements, there is a discussion about termination, and the views of both parties are discussed, and they come to a legal contract. You see, there you go, and they come to a legal agreement based on the fact that they have some type of common view when it comes to a lot of different things, when it comes to the need for intervention, such as surgeries, the need for certain type of treatments, um, lifestyle. And matter of fact, let's get into that part a little bit later. Let me just give you guys what's happening. So after they made that agreement, it was determined or diagnosed at the 20th week ultrasound that the baby had a left hypoplastic syndrome. So let's get into the seriousness of the left hypoplastic heart syndrome. Now, one of the things that you should know is that this is a congenital malformation, and it's one that is rare, but it's very, very serious. And typically, infants that are affected by this syndrome will need life-saving measures at birth, sometimes even requiring surgery soon after birth. But overall, will at some point require not one, not two, but oftentimes a few surgeries in order to be able to survive. And in some cases, will require an actual heart transplant. So, this is a very serious heart condition that may impair the overall lifestyle of the child, and that child will require ongoing, very serious care for the rest of its life. Now, the child was named by the surrogate, Gabriel, and was renamed Rumi by the parents. Now, that alone says a lot that she named the child Gabriel. I would say she probably has very strong religious views, which I'm surprised did not surface in their initial discussion, because a lot of her actions and a lot of things that she said on interviews seemed to sway in that direction. And I know I didn't say it before, so I'm going to say it now. If you have not done so before, and this is your first time to the platform, please do not forget to click subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and click that bell so that you have notification whenever I do what? Drop the next episode. Now, I am so thankful if this is your first time hopping on the platform. I'm so thankful for you being here for the very first time. If you have been returning to this platform to have these discussions and participate in these discussions, I am so incredibly grateful for you. I do not take it for granted. And for those of you who are members, if you are members and you want to really get into an unhinged, unfiltered discussion about this topic, hit me up in the comments, let me know, and we will do a separate discussion for members only. Because y'all know there's a lot more I could say, but I can't. So needless to say, anything about the heart is going to be vital. So whether it's right side, left side, but when it's left side, it's serious. So after the diagnosis, they actually made an agreement, and this is important to say. The couple and the gestational surrogate made an agreement to terminate. Now, initially, the surrogate was in agreement to terminate. She then said that as she bonded with the baby, she changed her mind. There was a date set for the termination in May. She changed her mind, and not only did she change her mind, she then left her native state of Alaska and flew to Texas. Now, that was intentionally done because of the laws in Texas that banned terminations in just about almost every single circumstance. So she flew to a state that she knew would protect and prevent her from having a termination. She claims allegedly that she felt that she was being forced by the intended parents. One thing that the intended parents made clear is that they never denied that they would allow the child to have surgery at birth. That's important. So while it sounds like they allegedly wanted to terminate the pregnancy, and according to the reports, they made that decision after speaking to specialists and medical and obtaining medical advice about the longevity and the quality of life that the child would have, and then came to the determination, for whatever reason, either they didn't want the child to suffer or they didn't want to deal with that, who knows? But for some reason, they decided that they did not want to continue in the pregnancy. Now, it is their right to make that decision because, again, it is their child. Now, where it gets a little funky is that McKenna West then flew to Texas. She obtained legal representation or counsel, and Ken Paxton, the Attorney General for Texas, then decides to put his hands in the whole situation. And so he got the courts to mandate that the hospital, which is the University of Southwestern, would be required to pursue or undergo life-saving measures for the baby, whatever that means. And that could mean just things like ECMO, where the baby's placed on a machine, where the machine then circulates the blood for the child, or it could mean immediate surgeries. I don't have that detail as to what that intervention required at the birth of the child. But whatever was required to save the child's life, the hospital was required to do so. Now, where I'm finding some discrepancies in the reporting is that some news outlets are reporting that the intended parents' rights are not being acknowledged, and that the hospital, the state, has now provided guardianship to then be the decision maker for the child, whereas other sources are claiming that the parents have obtained and still remain to have parental rights. And are in fact the decision maker for the child. That I have not found a consensus as to exactly what's going on with respect to who's the decision maker and ultimately who is responsible for the finances, the cost of the hospitalization, and all of the related medical care. Now, what I did find was that the intended parents have successfully obtained a temporary restraining order to prevent McKenna West from being involved in the care of the child. Now, keep in mind again, she is a gestational surrogate. She has no biological rights to the child. The child is not her eggs. The child is nothing from her genetically, in theory. In theory, right? Because I did talk to you guys about microchimerism, but we're not going to confuse this whole situation. But for those of you who have watched this platform and have been following us, you know what I'm hinting at about, the gray area of that, right? Because microchimerism is something that does happen, but that's a whole other situation. We're not going to get, that's a very gray area, so I'm not going to confuse y'all with including that part of the science. But that being said, so McKenna West has determined that and has made clear and is now pursuing legal action to obtain guardianship of the child since the parents initially wanted to end the pregnancy. Um, that's an interesting approach because it seems like, yes, the parent that was the original desire of the parents, but now that the child is here, it doesn't seem that that's still the desire of the parents to abandon the child. There's no indication so far in reporting that that is their position. Whereas legally, she really has no rights to the child once the child is born. Um, that being said, this definitely opens up a lot of issues when it comes to surrogacy and surrogacy cases. And what happens in this case is going to be so important and going to be a turning point potentially about surrogacy cases. Now, there are some people who dabble in conspiracy and they are fearful or concerned that this case will be used for political gains, that this case will be used to justify a national approach to these cases, especially if this case goes to the Supreme Court. And apparently, it sounds like McKenna West does want this case to go to the Supreme Court. Now, if you understand the current stance of the Supreme Court, you know it weighs very heavily conservatively. And as you know, it is the same court that made the Dobbs decision. So that could probably give you some foresight as to how a decision about this may weigh on a primarily conservative court. That being said, let's get into some more of the details that I think is going to be really important for you to know. So one of the things you may be asking is, how did she afford to make that trip to Texas? Because the whole point of people doing surrogacy, for the most part, not all, some people have a emotional or feel compelled to be a surrogate for spiritual reasons, for emotional reasons, for moral reasons that has nothing to do with the finances. But a lot of times people do make decisions with regards to becoming a surrogate based on financial needs. Apparently, allegedly, she was supported by an anti-AB organization. Fill out the word. So an anti-AB organization called Life Action apparently financially supported her to make that move to Texas, which then allowed her to create a for visualization purposes, a dome of protection around her, to not feel pressured financially or legally to pursue what the parents had desired originally. Now, the 20-week ultrasound for me makes total sense because that's when we typically perform an anatomy ultrasound. That's where you get a survey of the baby's body parts to really look for defects or soft markers that may indicate some type of syndrome, which in this case they found. There are some findings you can find really early, especially when someone is doing an NT ultrasound. If it's a really severe defect, you may be able to identify certain things on an earlier ultrasound. But traditionally, anatomy ultrasounds are done ideally between 18 and 22 weeks, but a lot of perinatologists prefer the 20 to 28 week time frame. So it makes sense that the baby was diagnosed at that time period. And that's why. For those of you who may be questioning, how come 20 weeks and it wasn't picked up earlier? It's because of that. So she specifically gave birth and obtained care on August 12th at, let me get the name of the hospital right. It's UT Southwestern Medical Center and Children's Medical Center of Dallas. So she ended up in Dallas, Texas, which interestingly, Dallas, Texas is a more liberal city than other areas in Texas, but nonetheless, it has some of the best medical care, the more advanced care that a child like this would need. So I'm not surprised that she ended up at this hospital, though there were others that she could have ended up at, but this hospital makes sense. Now let's get into surrogacy agreements because that's where a lot of the confusion is happening. And then we'll get into some of the questions that have still yet to be addressed or that this case will bring up. So when people make a surrogacy agreement, not a contract, agreement, there is a financial benefit to the surrogate, and that financial benefit doesn't start at the time that she gives birth. In fact, there's a base compensation, and then there are payments that are held in an escrow account that may cover things like the related costs to travel, healthcare related costs, if there is any out-of-pocket cost for her medical care, child care, lost wages, maternity clothes. These things are oftentimes standard coverage in these agreements. So she likely would have received some type of payment already based on their agreement. Now, these clauses also would include things like insurance policies, covering for medical bills. They waive the rights of the surrogate parents. So they waive the rights of the spouse of the surrogate and the surrogate herself, typically. Now, there are variations in these contracts. Let's listen to one surrogacy agency and their perspective on this issue.
A huge part of our informed consent is talking about termination, talking about these exact scenarios.
Angela Richardson Mook is the founder of Alicia Surrogacy, which is not involved in this case. She says disagreements happen, but problems like this are rare.
The time to discover that a surrogate and intended parent are fundamentally disagree about anything is in the matching process, in the legal process, and not in the middle of a medical crisis.
Okay, you guys. So what's important to know is that, again, there are variations on contracts in different agencies. McKenna West has filed a lawsuit against Worldwide Surrogacy, which was the agency that managed this particular case. It has been reported that she has been paid upwards of $60,000 so far for her expenses. So she has received some forms of payment already. The important things for you to know is that surrogacy agreements cannot enforce a surrogate to do certain things. She still obtains or has, and I'm using she generically, she meaning the surrogate, still has bodily autonomy. What does that mean? She cannot be forced to undergo certain treatments. She cannot be forced to undergo surgeries. She cannot be forced to undergo procedures, including, as in this case, termination, selective reduction, or even a cesarean section. So keep that in mind if you are considering a surrogate. You cannot make a surrogate, and while states vary in laws, across the board, even in other countries, you cannot make a surrogate do something with her body that she does not want to do. But typically, there is a discussion before the agreement is signed, and there is some understanding. And the process requires good faith, in good faith that you are not being deceiving with your perspective and with your views on these particular issues. If you're somebody who does not want to have a C-section under any circumstance, then you probably shouldn't sign or be a surrogate. So a surrogate that is ideal is one that has the same viewpoint or perspective or respects the decision making of the intended parents and is willing to do what the intended parents desire. That's the ideal surrogate. While there is sometimes disagreements, those disagreements are usually dealt with very early in the process and not when you have to make critical decisions about the continuation of the pregnancy. What's important to know also is that how states deal with this issue vary, meaning because it is an agreement, there is sort of cutting off the parents, which she allegedly did. She ended up cutting off the parents before she flew to Texas, allegedly. Doing that is a breach of the agreement. Now, the agreement to a certain extent is viewed as a contract. And so it has some features of a contract. And again, you lawyers out there, feel free to correct me in the comments, because this is a very very great area, and there are not a lot of laws specifically with regards to this. But that being said, it does act in some ways as a contract, and so not fulfilling your end of the agreement can make you in breach of the agreement, which can lead to certain consequences. Now, whether or not those consequences are behavioral or those consequences are financial really depends on the court. Now, here's where it gets tricky, because the agreement occurred with the parents being in California, so one state, and the initial residence of the surrogate was in Alaska. Then she eloped, for lack of a better word, to Texas. So one of the questions that's coming up with this case is, which state has jurisdiction over what part of the issue, if not the whole issue, right? Is it going to be Alaska? Is it going to be California's laws? Is it going to be Texas laws? And going from a state that's very liberal like California, who may have laws that are more in favor of a liberal approach, to a state that is very conservative like Texas with regards to this particular topic, may have a different outcome completely. And so one of the things that this case brings up is which state has jurisdiction and what jurisdiction does that state have, if not the entire case? And are there different aspects of the case that will have to be tried in court? Y'all, this is messy. This is really messy, because this is going to be a very expensive case. And I'm sure, in addition to dealing with the medical expenses of the child that's ill, I don't know how much money these parents have. They probably saved up to be able to have a surrogate. How much of a nightmare is this? That not only do they now have to take care of the child, but they also have to deal with now the legality of this, which requires them probably to have representation. Definitely, I would say in California, their state of origin, and now in Texas, and possibly in Alaska. this is messy. The other very important part of this discussion is who makes the decision and who pays the bills, right? Because right now, the one thing that is clear is that the intended parents have set up a temporary restraining order against the surrogates. Now, I think what most states will say is that the surrogate doesn't have rights. Even the judge in Texas was in agreement that she does not have rights to the child. But the question is now, since Texas and via the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, was the one that made the decision in terms of the care of the child, requiring the hospitals to take care of the child, is Texas now liable for the cost of that child? So are residents in Texas going to have to pay for the medical bill of that child? Since this was not the decision of the actual parents, and they overrode the decision-making of the parents, not to say that the decision of the parents would have been any different. I don't have information that seems to indicate anything like that. But let's say there were parents that disagreed with the decision in Texas. Should they be held liable to pay the bill? Let me know what you think in the comments. And let me know what you think in the comments about which state should be held responsible to making the decision-making about this case, about who's responsible, how the breach of the agreement is dealt with. The other thing that I thought about with regards to this case, which again is going to really tap on a lot of very foundational issues and discussions. The other thing that this case brought up for me is that since the surrogate doesn't have ownership of the child, she has no parental rights to the child. She only has autonomy of her body. Now, the fact that she lacks ownership of the child, the genetic makeup of that child belongs to the intended parents. Now, she took something that, and I say something loosely, don't come at me, you know what, follow me and you'll understand what I'm saying. I understand, follow me. So she took something, in this case, okay, hold up. Let me make sure I make this clear, y'all. She took something in terms of ownership, not in terms of humanity yet. I'm gonna get into humanity in a second. In terms of ownership, she took something that doesn't belong to her and relocated it without the owner's permission to another state to then block their rights. Again, she took something that doesn't belong to her and took it to another state to then block the owner's rights. Let me know how that works out in terms of theft, right? That is theft of something. In this case, it's a child, which opens up another discussion, right? So let's get into the fact that it is a child. So what's interesting is that she ran to a state that recognizes the life that was grown in her as a person, right? So personhood laws are what are sort of navigating the decision-making of this, right? Is the baby that's not born considered to be a person? Texas says yes. Here's the thing. She may have done herself a disservice in that sense. Like, I don't think she realized, and I don't know if she had legal decision-making or just relied on the organization that financially supported her. But she took a child. So if we're going by Texas definition, right? She took a child that doesn't belong to her to another state and crossed state lines. Y'all, lawyers out there, I need y'all to let me know, does that qualify as kidnapping? Because you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't go to the state where you now block the intended parents because now you're in a state that defines the child as being a personhood, But if the child is a personhood and that personhood doesn't belong to you, it's somebody else's child, isn't that kidnapping? I won't go as far as trafficking, even though I could see how people may try to throw that out there also. But at basic, I think there may be an argument for kidnapping. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just saying, in my humble opinion, I'm not alleging anybody did anything. I'm just saying, in my humble opinion of trying to navigate understanding of the law, it seems like there are some laws and maybe even criminality because of what she did. Even though she has autonomy of her own body, she could have fought that in her own state and maintain autonomy of her body. The fact that she took the child, the person that doesn't belong to her, that is a minor, against the parents' rights to another state may have opened up some possible criminal questions, criminal activity questions. Let me know what you think in the comments. This is interesting. The other thing I want to bring up that a lot of people don't necessarily consider when it comes to surrogates, when it comes to intended parents, when it comes to adoptive parents, is the impact of any type of pregnancy on their mental health. So you can experience as a surrogate postpartum mood disorders, depression, anxiety. You can experience as intended parents postpartum or perinatal mood disorders, such as anxiety and depression. I almost blanked there for a second, y'all. So, such as anxiety and depression, you can experience those same perinatal mood disorders also as adoptive parents. So, I really do wonder what is the mindset of all parties involved. And I am concerned about the mental health of all parties involved for a variety of reasons. And the final question is, what's going to happen to surrogacies? Now, do you think that what happened in this case is now going to make people more apprehensive about getting into these agreements? Is there going to be a push for more legal protection for the intended parents? Pretty much, you would say that there is not, there is currently not a overall agreement when it comes to bodily autonomy, right? Because what's interesting is in this case is that Texas, that doesn't believe in bodily autonomy, now is claiming bodily autonomy in this case. You see where I'm going? Texas, that has laws that requires women to carry and complete the pregnancy, is now claiming this that overrides basically women's bodily autonomy by legally forcing them to complete pregnancy. The irony of that same state now saying this surrogate has bodily autonomy. Texas, we gonna need you to make up your mind. Does bodily autonomy exist in Texas or not? Because in this case, you're saying she has bodily autonomy, but in all other cases, you're saying other women don't. I'm a little confused with your stance. I'm a little confused with your stance. Now, that being said, I really do wonder what happens as a result. I hope this doesn't discourage other surrogacy cases. This is not typical. Perhaps there should be improved screening of individuals before they enter into these agreements. However, you can only screen but so much. It seemed to these intended parents that she was in agreement or in alignment with their views and their perspective on how to manage the pregnancy. According to her, her mind changed as she felt the baby move and as she bonded with the baby in her womb. It's interesting. It's an interesting case. And I want to know what your thoughts are about this case. I think that this case raises a lot of questions about future surrogacy cases And I will be, for one, watching what happens because it's going to make a lot of decisions. Is this going to go to the Supreme Court? I think a state like Texas would use this case to push it to the Supreme Court because there are organizations that are determined to make a federal mandate when it comes to these types of issues to override bodily autonomy of women. And I can see her becoming the face of these cases to then push for a more federal approach to these cases. And that is where everybody is currently now very concerned, deeply concerned that this case, if it does go to the Supreme Court, knowing the stance of the Supreme Court, that it could make a decision that would impact women in every single state. Now, was she a setup to do this? I don't know. I'm not going to dive into the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, but I know this is some of the discussion, whether this was a setup to head in this particular direction, because there are other states she could have gone to, but she didn't. Now, granted, Texas is probably the most prototype when it comes to the most restrictive laws with regards to these types of issues, but it really does raise a lot of concern about the future. That being said, I am Dr. T, the hand behind the handle of Healthy Bump Club right here on YouTube and healthybump.club on Instagram. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope I have brought clarity to this case for you. Hope I've had your wheels turning about these issues, but I also want to know, what do you think? I value your input, your comments, so hit me up in the comments today, and I hope to see you guys when? The next episode. Bye, y'all. This is Dr. T, just a friendly reminder, don't forget to comment, like, and share, and go ahead, why not? Click that subscribe button. Help us to get to the next 1,000 subscribers. We thank you guys for supporting.